Welcome back, all my 40k fanatics out there. I'm DJ here with Tim's Nation to bring you my list that will be taking on Lane and the Blood Angels later on this evening. First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for all the kind wishes. Just so everyone knows, first and foremost, I'm back on my feet, which is a good thing. But, everything isn't as serious as some of the words that seem to come out. It's just something that has to be taken care of. If I don't, then it could turn into something extremely serious. But, taking my medicine, I got a couple follow-up appointments, just letting the medicine and the process take care of itself and we'll all be good. But I'm back on my feet, ready to start playing some Warhammer, ready to start playing some 40k. And today it is a video for my cronies. That's right, we're bringing back the Necrons. And this detachment is one that I've been waiting for a while to play. Now, this game is going to be interesting because this is something that Lane and I have been discussing for a while, and I've had a lot of opinions on, and that is the Blood Angels. I believe that we were waiting to see the Blood Angels points, start seeing some lists, because I believe very strongly we are going to be looking at a Blood Angels winter. I think Blood Angels are going to be the standard for what close combat looks like in 40k. Shooting armies can still play their regular shooting game. They shoot on objectives, shoot your armies off the board, all that same style play. But for other armies that have close combat aspects to them or are close combat armies, the question is going to be, can they stand up to the Blood Angels? Space Wolves, specifically their TCAV, are a very, very strong combat marine choice army. But TCAV specifically struggle with terrain, being able to move around it because they can't move through it. So sometimes they can get kind of walled, stopped, and put in a position where they can't progress forward. Blood Angels, being very infantry-based, are able to move through terrain as if it's not even there. So I think that's going to make a big aspect for it. Some armies like Death Guard that have easy access in the fight first, and other armies that can access fight first is going to be very, very, very important over the overall scheme of things. But I feel like the Blood Angels are going to be the standard bearer. They're going to be setting that bar. And given the nature of Warhammer and how competitive Warhammer is scored and how we score points and how you win games, Blood Angels push onto objectives. A shooting army can shoot a unit and take it off the objective. Cool, your opponent doesn't have it anymore, but neither do you. Blood Angels, on the other hand, they're doing most of their damage in combat, which involves charging, which involves moving, which adds a lot of other layers to the game. One being the fact that now these units are closer to you, which means units that want to come in from reserve are going to be coming in further away. And two, in order to take that objective, you may have to engage the Blood Angels on the terms that they want, and that is in combat. So, being able to shoot them down and then charge them is going to be obviously a positive point of doing that. But needless to say, an army that is a combat army like Blood Angels that can play the game, and their strongest aspect being combat, gives them extra move, gives them more push, gives them more board presence, and puts them on objective markers around the board. I think we're going to be looking at a good little bit of time that Blood Angels are going to be very, very tough. And we're going to see that here soon, because that is what Lane is bringing today. So for me, on my side, I've been playing a lot of the Imperial Agents. It's a tough army. It is a very tough army. One thing I love about those tough armies, though, is when you go back to a book that is a stronger codex, such as the Necrons that I'm playing today, it opens the door on so many different things, because when you're using abilities and you're struggling to put stuff together and you have to be very, very precise in your movements, and then you take that and you go over into a book or a codex that has more forgiveness to it, it's really interesting what you can put together. And then you start seeing things that you may not have seen before. So I'm looking forward to that with Necrons. And those who know me on the channel, I know I love my Canoptic Court, the Canoptic Harvest, as I like to call it. Not running them today. That's my personal number one choice. I know a lot of people like Hypercrypt. Hypercrypt is a very powerful option that we've seen it in a lot of tournaments all over the place. For me, if I'm going to play an up-down army, it's going to be Grey Knights, because I love my Grey Knights, and well, that's all they do. So if I'm looking for an army that can up, down, and do all that stuff, it's going to be Grey Knights over Hypercrypt for that reason. Doesn't mean I won't play Hypercrypt for fun. It is a fun army to play, especially with some of the tools and mechanics like we've seen with the Deathmark list that I was running before. There is some fun with it, and I have another build that I'm interested in trying. But I'm going to run, which is probably my second favorite. I call them Dynasties. Detachment, Dynasties. You get the gist. The Obeisance Phalanx. Now, the Obeisance Phalanx has had a lot of buffs come into it. Not necessarily with the Phalanx itself, but in some of the other units. Triarch Priorians dropping in points. The Silent King gaining the Triarch keyword, so now he gains some of those buffs. Things like that make this army potentially more functional. Also, the Obeisance Phalanx, they changed it from Overlord unit to, in some ways, to Noble. So, basically the same thing. Really, I think it ties in like the Royal Warden, and that's about it. But needless to say, there's a lot more love around what the Obeisance Phalanx can do now in some of these aspects. So that's what we're going to bring in today. As far as what some of the units and locking this in, this is a list that I ran before in Leviathan. And one of the issues I was having was scoring 60 points, 70 points, not quite being able to push that needle into 80 and realizing I wasn't going to be able to based on the way the army was designed. Now, going into Pariah Nexus, a lot of the secondaries and things have changed. I've been really wanting to try this army out because I thought I had a lot of success with it. And I want to see if I can translate that success over to this newer style with how Pariah Nexus bases more around battle lines, especially since I have 3 battle line units, and a lot of the battle line units are a big part of the force. All right, I've talked enough about what I'm trying here. Let's talk about the list and what I'm bringing here today. All right, here you got it. This is the Obeisance Phalanx. So the Obeisance Phalanx attachment rule is that I select a unit at the beginning of the turn, an enemy unit, and that unit, I will get +1 to wound against it for every Overlord, which is now changed to Noble, Lich Guard, and Triarch unit. So a Noble unit will be any unit that has a Noble in it. Now, the only Nobles are, sadly, because there's still some changes that need to be tweaked. Like the Catacomb Command Barge doesn't have the Noble keyword. So there is still some tweaks I think that need to be done to fix some stuff with this. Overlords and Royal Wardens are the only nobles. The Silent King was given the Triarch keyword, but lost Fly, interestingly enough. And that means that the Silent King can gain some of these abilities and buffs, the +1 to wound and some other targeting things, but we're not bringing him today. He's big, he costs a lot of points, and I have a little bit of a different direction and idea with this list, but it's nice to see that at least he's able to function in this attachment better than probably he was before. Now, as I mentioned, Royal Wardens, Overlords are the only ones that are the nobles. Typically, I'm not running any Royal Wardens, but I do have plenty of Overlords, which we'll get to those and where they're going here today. So let's start off with some key stratagems just real fast for this detachment. One of the things I like with this is the 1 command point, 5-up crit. Taking Plasmancers is nice. I really like Chronomancers, and as I mentioned in my Immortal video, the Obeisance Phalanx allows you to not feel like you need to take more Plasmancers to really maximize your critical hits. Having that 1 command point strat plus having Overlords to make it for free is a solid play to be able to get that still 5-up crit without the Plasmancer. So that means I'll be able to have 2 units that have 5-up crits because I do have a Plasmancer in the army. Some other things to note are being able to boost my objective control value for Lich Guard or Triarch units. The Triarch Stalkers being able to get a bonus 3 to their OC value, while the regular Triarch Priorians and Lich Guard get an additional 1, which can be crucial for snagging an objective since it's done during the command phase and we score secondaries at the end. So that's an interesting strat that can come in handy, as well as the precision stratagem. It's a weird one, but if you're in combat, especially with like the Lich Guard and the Triarch, you can pick off a character when you have Assassinate, or just remove a character to take away some defensive or offensive buffs before the unit even gets to strike at you. So that stratagem is not too bad, and I've used it a handful of times, and it's definitely one to keep in mind. Now, as for the list, first and foremost, let's start with the Triarch Stalkers. Triarch Stalkers are the vehicles of this army. Well, once again, they are Triarch units, so they'll gain the bonus of the +1 to wound if that's the unit that I'm targeting. Now, I gave these guys Heat Rays because they don't have a lot of high AP, high damage weapons, so I wanted that. Now, the Heat Ray is only strength 9, so it's not going to be that great into things like toughness 12 Land Raiders and stuff like that. But for me, I'm not as concerned about those. Those big, chunky things like Imperial Knights, Land Raiders, and stuff like that, they're big and chunky for a reason. So I'm not as concerned about those. What I'm concerned about is things like rhinos and small transport vehicles, as I've mentioned a couple times. Your opponent being able to use those small transport vehicles to score secondaries is just such an extra buff for those things. You have a rhino that drops off its payload, then runs over to the corner and starts doing containment or any of the other action-based secondaries. Some of the other ones that may require a unit to survive all the way through to your opponent's turn. Rhinos are durable enough to make it happen, especially if they're hiding. The Triarch Stalkers are something that can actually pick them up, or at least do enough damage that other units can pick them up. And being able to remove those things quickly leads to then your opponent needs to have a different unit perform those actions. Now, your opponent's losing shots or combat or something else that they might have wanted to bring to the front line because they have to complete an action in order to score those secondaries to keep the scoreboard moving. Makes your opponent make decisions instead of it being, oh, I'm just going to move this rhino over here and contain and score 5 points now because I got 2 units doing it. So having that heavy Melta range style weapon is going to be very helpful, and then I can target the rhino to give myself +1 to wound and allow something like one of my immortal squads to be able to hit it as well and finish it off. These guys have a 4-up invulnerable save, which is also super, super nice because it can just 4-up invulns are very tough in this game, as many of us have seen. And these guys got a scout move, so they can get out of my deployment zone early and just start to move around the field and just give me a little extra boost to momentum across the field. Next up, we have the 2 Canoptic Reanimators. Canoptic Reanimators is something that I've been very high on. These guys have a 3-up save with a 4-up Feel No Pain, which makes them pretty durable. These fall into that column of something that your opponent doesn't want to have to spend time destroying. As we've seen with things like the Subjugators, things that are durable, that are cheap, with these guys only being 75 points, can be very obnoxious. These guys are excellent to be able to go around and perform secondaries because they can still heal and use their reanimation beams while doing secondaries. Now, granted, the reanimation beam is only 3 inches, which means that they're going to be in not the best positions when they start doing this stuff, but they are at that. It's just so nice when they can. And your opponent has to use resources to actually remove these things. If they don't, you're going to be pouring more and more models back onto the field. I don't mind putting these things in strategic reserve, especially because they can come on to wherever the game is, be in a better position, possibly not get destroyed, and bank off things like resurrection orbs to be able to put additional models back into units. With how many res orbs I have in the army, this is a very strong combo that these guys can be out of line of sight and still throw that onto them. These guys are also vehicles, and there's a damage reduction strat that this army has that targets a Necron vehicle unit. So being able to reduce the damage by 1 and then trigger a Feel No Pain can be really, really annoying and keep these guys alive. And as I mentioned with rhinos, these are guys that can do actions that your opponent is going to have to spend resources to remove that they may not exactly want to or have a lot of time to. Moving over into the other secondary, into a unit that's secondary / combat is my Triarch Praetorians. These guys have had a tough time in 10th edition, mostly because of how they've been pointed. Their stats leave some to be desired, and then their points were way too high. Now their points have come down to be more reasonable. And with these guys having a toughness 5 and a very strong combat weapon that also doubles as a gun, because I'm taking the route of the Covenant, and deep strike and reroll charges, these guys are pretty cool. I like the fact that I have a deep strike agent coming out of this unit. That was one thing that I was struggling with before when I was playing this army, is that I didn't have really those things to score. I know there is Ophidian destroyers and things like that, but being able to use the Triarch Stalker or Praetorians, being able to actually get these guys out there when they haven't really seen a lot of play, I feel a little bit better on them. I ran these guys before, and when we were just messing around with the Kroot, and I actually really like them. Their ability to deep strike in, the fact that they can go in precision mode, they're just general little bit tougher than most stat line, especially having that toughness 5. They do have 2 wounds, which is a standard Marine profile, but just the general toughness of these guys and the fact that they can reanimate. So if you don't remove the whole squad, I'm bringing them back. Again, with the Route of the Covenant, yeah, it's only 1 shot and 3 attacks in combat, but that Strength 5 AP 2 damage can be really nice, especially when it's being paired with the +1 to wound, meaning that these guys can go into something like those Marines that we're talking about that are toughness 4, and now they're wounding them on 2s and can really clean those squads up very, very, very fast out of this detachment. So the last of the things that really do secondaries, the Triarch Stalkers are not big on secondaries, but I have no problem with them completing actions. And they also have the ability to go for additional objective control value. So they can. The Reanimators and the Praetorians are going to be a lot more in secondary, while the Praetorians can do more damage. One that will definitely be probably part of the secondary game is my Psychomancer. You know I love this guy. He's going to be running by himself today, as I usually do. And his purpose is to hit things and try and make a battle shock. If I get that battle shock, that means that stratagems can't be used on that unit. It could also mean a very, very easy little tag objective, so I don't have to do much more work onto it and go, oh, cool, I'm just going to score these points because now you have objective control value 0. He can use all these abilities while completing actions, and he doesn't need line of sight to target a unit within 18 and zap them for a battle shock. So he is a very cool little cheap utility piece that can still get actions. He is squishy, so he can get removed very quickly and very easily. But, you know, that's also why we have things like Strategic Reserve for him to come out of if I feel I need that. And yeah, all around, I love this guy. He's a lot of fun for me, not for my opponents, and he's making his appearance here today again. So now we got to move over into some of the synergies of where this build is. But before we get to that, we'll start working our ways back with still some of the Obeisance failing stuff. First off, the Lich Guard. We have a 10-man squad of Lich Guard. These guys are a big brick bulk. Try that again. These are a big brick bulky unit to just move across the field. There we go. This is a unit I like to try and get on center field, charging or moving, that can just sit there, soak up a lot of damage with that 4-up invuln, be tough at toughness 5, reducing or -1 to wound as long as they're led by a character versus weapons that are higher strength. So that's a big positive defensive buff. And these guys will be led by a character, an overlord of some sorts, depending on what I feel I need for that game. Either the Translocation Shroud or a standard overlord. So they will always have that buff. Lich Guard do have the ability, again, 1 command point, boom, we're +1 OC. I can be precision to just get that character out of the way. Yeah, Lich Guard. They still are good. They're not invincible like they once were, but they're still very strong. And now this detachment, still very, very strong. Now let's get over into the big part of the Obeisance phalanx, the Battal Line units. And what makes them run? Well, first and foremost, Illuminator Xeris. Illuminator Xeris. His big thing is that he has aura effects that affect Battle Line units. Now, if he eliminates a unit or a model, in combat, he can extend the range of that ability. But for the most part, it starts off relatively small. And he gives every Battle Line unit +1 AP to its weapons. combat and shooting, as well as reducing AP by 1 to incoming attacks. We are seeing many armies that spend command points and question and want to all the time for true silver armor and armor of contempt. Well, here we go. We have a beacon of it that moves across the field. He has loan up, so as long as he's with near a Necron unit, he's got load up, and it's 12 inches. You need to be within range to even hit him. And then when you get there and you do hit him, he has a 2-up save, a 4-up invulnerable, a 4-up feel no pain, toughness 9, 8 wounds. He is just, I would say he's a monster, but no. He's infantry because I'm sorry, toughness 8 with 9 wounds. He is infantry. So he can even move through walls too. He does have some decent shooting and decent combat, but that's not really where it's at. He can do secondaries towards center field if we need him to, which is nice for actions. More or less, it's the buff agent that it's really tough to destroy. And then later in the game, he can do some more of that damage. His Eldritch Lance is hilarious. It's a 36-inch range, basically melt a weapon. So it is, like I said, he's very good on multiple facets and very cheap for everything he does. And moves far too. All right. So like I said, he buffs Battal Line units. And what we have is 3 10-man squads of Immortals. 2 with Tesla and 1 with Gauze Blasters. The Gauze Blaster will always have the Plasmancer with them, which we'll talk about in a second, and the Tesla will always have Chronos. Tesla is Assault, Sustain 2, so they can advance, shoot, and then after they shoot, the Chronomancer will let them move again. The Gauze have Lethal, so having that boost to the critical hits can give me kind of a makeshift devastating wounds type mechanic, where Xeris giving them the additional AP can allow me kind of to force through a little bit of needle damage in the same way that we kind of throw dice at devastating wounds to just kind of force through that little bit of damage to make sure to finish something off. These guys are toughness 5, 1 wound, which means they stand up very well off things like the Resurrection Orb and the Reanimators, and they are durable with that toughness 5. The Armor of Contempt, they're a 3-up save. That's cool. Put them in cover. They are really tough to dig out. Oh, what else can I say about these guys? Oh, they have 2 attacks in combat, which means that when you have things like their inherent ability, which is the biggest reason you take these guys, they reroll 1s to wound. But they all reroll all wound rolls when they're fighting something or shooting at something that's within range of an objective marker. This means that they can just, in combat, gaining AP1 can suddenly turn into a very threatening combat unit. And as I mentioned with Blood Angels, this is where we start looking at stuff. Random locations and being able to boost your attacks like that are going to be very strong for these guys, for things like this. And that's why I still like these. And I think that they still cross that threshold to be able to compete against things like Blood Angels in combat, where Blood Angels are not going to want to get punched by an Immortal that has 2 attacks at AP1, rerolling wounds, accidental damage that goes through that is going to be in excess of what they really want to take. Now, these guys, in order to really work, they need to be led by a noble, which means we got a couple characters. So first things first, as I mentioned, we have 1 Plasmancer. This guy's going to be with the Gauze Immortals. He gives the 5-up crits, and all around is just an awesome damage dealer. I actually have considered, and we may see later on, just be running solo Plasmancers to float around the field, zapping things. They're too silly damage for their point cost. On top of that, like I said, 5-up crit means that the lethals and the Gauze Destructor squads are going to be getting that 5 boost. So that's very nice. I don't put him with them with the Tesla because we do have access to the stratagem to be able to still do an additional unit with a +1, put the 5-up. And also, I really, really like the Chronos ability. And let's jump over into these guys, the Chronomancers. Chronomancers give stealth to the unit that they lead. On top of that, they also give the ability to shoot and then move, which means that these Tesla Immortals can advance, shoot, and then move into cover or move further across the field, giving the Tesla Immortals a very, very, very large movement. So that's why I like these over here. And since we still have access to the stratagem to have a 5-up crit, one of the Tesla Immortal squads can still be critting on a 5-up. and gaining all those ridiculous amounts of shots. Now, one aspect that we do need is we're going to need some reroll the hits, and we do have that enhancement. And that is going to be coming from one of our 3 Overlords. We have 3 Overlords in this army. All 3 are equipped with a Resurrection Orb and an Overlord's Blade for the, not the Overlord's Blade, the Void Scythe for the for the 3 damage. Yeah, that's what I wanted, the 3 damage Void Scythe and the Strength 12. That combined with reroll wounds means these guys can hit that devastating pretty easily, and it's really nice, especially with their being attached to a squad of immortals that have the reroll wounds. Now, these are the ones where my enhancements are. One Overlord will have the -1 to hit in combat enhancement. The other one has the reroll wounds when targeting, or reroll hits when targeting a unit that's on an objective. So whichever unit that I feel I really want to make sure I can get that extra hit rolls into, depending on my matchup, that's going to have that Overlord attached to them. And then the other one will get a generic Overlord. Now, one of my Tesla squads, most likely the reduce -1 to hit is probably going to go with the Lich Guard. But what's nice with this army is I have the ability to bounce around these enhancements and the Overlords as I see fit. Typically, the Overlord with the -1 will go either with the Gauze Destructor. Not the Gauze Destructor, a Tesla squad that I put forward, or the Lich Guard, because of the fact just make the Lich Guard more durable. In this matchup, I probably will be putting him with Lich Guard because Blood Angels want to fight in combat, so it makes the Lich Guard that much harder to hurt. Otherwise, we have a single Overlord with a Translocation Shroud. This Overlord also has a Resurrection Orb, and he's going to be with a squad of Tesla Immortals. This means that squad is going to auto-advance 6 for very, very large movement to be able to get across the field. Now, one thing about Overlords, all 3 variants, is they all have the ability to reduce stratagems by 1. You know, it was before reduce them to 0, but now with the recent update, it's reduced by 1. A lot of my strats are 1 CP, so these 3 guys, I can target a unit and get that free stratagem. This helps a lot to have that extra command points to be able to do stuff, and I think it's going to overall be a very, very strong aspect in this army. No grenade strats in this army. I'm going to double check, but I don't think anyone in the Necron army really has grenades. But still being able to do stuff like the boosted crits 5-ups for free onto 1 squad is very, very nice. And then being able to still have the Plasmancer, so we have 2 units that are critting on 5s, means that we're going to be able to get that extra damage out there. A lot of speed, a lot of mobility, and a lot of durability in this list. We'll see how it performs today. So like I said, this is a Xeris build. Xeris is very, very strong. And when going into the Blood Angels, they're going to want to get in combat with me. So for this is going to be a time where I'm definitely going to want that -1 to hit on the Lich Guard and be able to put them in front and use them as a screen. Now, there's a lot of times people say, oh, why would you want to use Lich Guard as a screen? Well, they're just that durable. Now, having that -1 to hit means that it's going to be tougher for the Blood Angels to hit me. Then we're -1 to wound, so even if they do cross that threshold of being able to go over my toughness, now we're going to bring that back down. Sometimes they have that +1 to wound, so we might be able to wash that away, their +1s to wound and stuff like that, making the Lich Guard just more durable and able to slow down the onslaught. Especially with the lack, I wouldn't say complete lacks. I know there's going to be some shooting. Obviously, Lane always has shooting in his list. And even playing Blood Angels, you're still going to have some shooting. But I'm going to be able to get the Reanimators probably in better positions to be able to consistently charge and charge up those squads as a battery, to be a battery for these units. And then things like the Praetorians, you know, units that are going to try and sneak onto objectives in other places and hold things, or maybe last little Marine units. Marines don't really resurrect. So whatever that squad is down to, that's what they're going to get hit with. And even with the Blood Angels being very tough in combat and a couple of guys being able to smack 2 or 3 Praetorians, I can sit on objective and do work while resurrecting the squad and getting them back to a better number to then move out there later. As far as what I plan on doing with this list, I'm still on the fence on what I want to take in November to the event that I'm going to, if I want to take the Imperial Agents that I've been practicing, or if I want to take this with the Necrons. This was originally what I had planned on taking in November, was the Obeisance Phalanx. I was going to work on it some more. But I've been really enjoying the Imperial Agents. The only thing that deters me is one, for the team making a good showing. And also, there's a lot of guys who I've been talking to that are going to be getting ready and prepping for LVO, and they know I'm coming. So they're like, oh, you got to play Necrons. We want to play Necrons. Because amongst the guys, I'm the Necron guy. So it's like they know that when I play Necrons, I know them backwards and forwards. And even though I might bring something crazy, if they can handle my crazy stuff, then they can handle a standard army of most sets. A lot of them have played it against Hypercrypt, so they're very comfortable with Hypercrypt, as we see a lot of it. But what they're concerned about is the other oddball Necron armies that I like to run that would probably do a lot more work. Things like the Canoptic Court and the Obeisance Phalanx that have play, but they haven't seen as much because the common popular builds tend to go skewed over to Hypercrypt, which has been slowly nerfed every datasheet hit. So part of me wants to go and bring the Necrons for a request because there's a couple people that are trying to practice for LVO. And part of me wants to take Imperial Agents and just giggle if I'm able to go 3-0 with those. That'd be hilarious. Very unlikely, but hilarious nonetheless. All right. Well, that's it for today. Again, I'm back on my feet. I'm ready for this. We're bringing the Obeisance Phalanx. We got Overlords galore, Xeris on the table, and Triarch Praetorians actually looking at possibly using in a competitive list. Love it, love it, love it. All right. That's all I got for today. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.